When things get too rough in life, sometimes all you want is a fresh start. To disappear into a world filled with excitement and adventure. Why would you want to be stuck at a desk job when you can form a party and scour the world together, facing beasts taller than buildings, looting dungeons, and becoming the knights of our childhood dreams? The closest we can get to that dream is through fiction, and Isekai is the ultimate escapism. This is perhaps one of the most oversaturated genres of anime we've had over the years. Every season you can expect that at least 50% of the airing shows will have some sort of isekai component to it, whether it be that the protagonist is transported to another world, the past, or the future. But since this market is so oversaturated, more and more copycats are being produced. It's getting harder to find an original story that doesn't end up falling into the same pit traps that this genre is known for. Writers are falling into using gimmicks as a crutch. Some of these gimmicks end up working out, but many of them become thrown to the wayside, lost in the clutter of every other show or book trying to make a name for itself. That's where Mushoku Tensei comes in, the story that started it all. Many claim that without this, isekai wouldn't be as we know it today, as it set up the roadmap that many would follow. And with Season 2 having wrapped up, and a third season on the horizon, what better time is there than to take a step back and examine why this show stands out above all the rest? And when you talk about Mushoku Tensei, there's always a new controversy, and there's nothing new when it comes to Season 2, Part 2. But there are a few things to keep in mind here. 1. If you were able to get over Rudeus' weird age technicality to get to this point, then it shouldn't be bothering you now. Can it be weird sometimes? Oh yes, but this is what happens when we play the reincarnation game. 2. I'll strictly be talking about the events that we've seen in the anime so far. I don't know what happens in the light novels, and I want it to stay that way. I just got the digital versions of the first few volumes. I'm reading it, okay? I've heard things get even more controversial later on in the story, and if it gets to a point where I need to jump ship, I'll jump ship. But I'll be making that decision on my own. So now that the groundwork's been laid, let's get into it. I've seen a lot of discourse surrounding this newer season of Mushoku Tensei, and I'm not talking about the haters of the show. Rudeus is a lot to swallow, and I understand why he'd turn off a chunk of the audience. To some, he's unredeemable, and that's completely understandable. But for those who are able to look past Rudeus' past actions for the story and his journey of redemption, some felt as if that very story fell off, both in pacing and in animation. Season 1 was this globe-trotting adventure fraught with danger around every corner and absolutely jaw-dropping animation. When a fight was going down, you instantly got into shrimp mode, absolutely amazed by the spectacle unfolding before your very eyes. Season 2 had been very anticipated by the anime community, and we got it pretty quickly, with Part 1 coming out just a couple years after the end of Season 1, and Part 2 only a year after that. There are definitely much less fights in Season 2 compared to Season 1. But, honestly, is the animation really that much of a downgrade? I mean, really. The animators are way over the bar of quality here. But when it comes to the pacing of the show, that's when the biggest difference between seasons can be seen. I wouldn't say it's as jarring as Vinland Saga and Farmland Saga, but it's a much more slower and personal tale than the second half of Season 1. I'd say it's closer in line to the pacing of the first 8 or so episodes of the series. But it's in this slower paced story that we get to see what makes Mushoku Tensei so special when compared to other series in the isekai genre. The true magic of Mushoku Tensei Season 2 Part 2 doesn't come from the action or the adventure a fantasy world can offer. It comes from the drama each character draws from one another. We're getting to the point in the series where the character dynamics are so complex and intermingled, no one decision from one character can't be made without affecting the actions and decisions of everyone else around them. The first 6 episodes of this season are basically a fantasy slice of life. There is no grand journey, there's no prophecy, and there's no enemy to be defeated. There's a small wedding, and Rudeus is reacquainted with his younger sisters. And for the first 6 episodes, this is all we're given. But this is where we get to see Rudeus' true growth shine. Because of his past accomplishments, he's accidentally created this air of expectation for his sister Norn to meet. Everyone in the school knows that they're related, and they expect her to be just as special as he is. to be just as much of a magical genius as he is, to be as smart as he is, to be as gifted as he is, to be him. So when she fails to meet those expectations time and time again for weeks on end, she shuts down. The slightest hint of comparison between her and her brother sends her into a spiral, and she locks herself in her room, just like Rudeus had in his past life. One of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to a lot of isekai nowadays is that they don't feel like they need to be an isekai. If they had been part of the fantasy genre, barely anything in the story would have changed. In fact, it probably would have been better off for it. The controversy around Rudeus' age certainly wouldn't be an issue if Mushoku Tensei was an ordinary fantasy. But it's times like this where Mushoku Tensei reminds us why it needs to be an isekai. While the circumstances might be different, when Rudeus sees his sister shut down, when he sees her crawl away into the safety of her room, he can't help but be reminded of his past life, and how those very actions were the beginning of the end for him. Thinking that she's being bullied, he demands to know who did this to her. Who's the bully who's forced his sister to completely shut herself out? Who could have possibly done this to her? Ready to punish them in a way he could never have done to his own bullies in the past. It doesn't take long for him to find out that his sister was crushed under the weight of his overwhelming reputation. This is when Rudeus takes a page from his brother's book. And it's not a brother he had in this world. It's the brother he had in his first life. Someone who tried to be there for him when he shut the world out. Someone who did their best to get Rudeus back outside, to unlock the chains that kept him imprisoned in his room. Someone who tried to show him that the world isn't as cruel as he thinks it is. But in the end, no matter how hard he tried, his words fell on deaf ears, and Rudeus ended up pushing away the only person in the world who had his back. And this is something Rudy regrets. He regrets being so stubborn that he forced away the only family he had left, the only person in his corner. And he knows why his brother failed. His heart was in it, but his words couldn't have possibly been worse. How many times have you been told that it'll get better? That somebody else out there in the world has it way worse than you? And how many times has that ever solved your problems? When you hear that somebody else has it worse than you, that's not comforting. That's just telling you to get back up, because you don't deserve to be sad. It's throwing your feelings out. And while Rudeus' brother was trying to do this out of good intentions, it only made things far, far worse for the Rudeus of that time. So Rudy takes the drive that his brother had, but he says the words that he wished that were said to him back then, hoping that it's enough to restart his sister's spark. What makes Mushoku Tensei stand as one of the best isekai out there despite its controversies is the fact that Rudeus has never let go of his past trauma. Just because he was born in another world doesn't make it that his past experiences never existed. I still remember watching the first season, being told that this is one of the best fantasy isekai animes out there, and then being absolutely baffled when we spent a couple of episodes focusing on Rudeus' anxiety, and that how it was so crippling that he couldn't even step outside the gates of his own home. He'd finally escaped the real world, born into a fantasy with power many would kill to be in, but the chains that locked him in his room in his past life were still locked tightly around his soul. Most isekai just don't do that. Problems are solved with the wave of a hand and the hero is as strong as they come. It's part of the ultimate escapism. But we see with Rudeus time and time again that he's not strong enough to do it all on his own. His hubris constantly gets the better of him, and because of that, there are serious consequences. People get hurt, and in the worst case, people die. His trauma can drive him forward, or freeze him in place. Watching as this man is given a second chance to grow, to face his fears and make something of his life, only to be met time and time again with failure, depression, inadequacy, imposter syndrome, and still manage to somehow climb his way out of the narrow tunnel, thanks to the friends he's made in this fresh start, feels so cathartic. Rudeus started at absolute zero. In some cases, I think he started way past zero in the worst ways possible, that are even detrimental to the show. But when it comes to the story Mushoku Tensei is telling, I don't know how it's managed to do it, but it really is crafting an incredible tale of redemption and growth for him. Okay, so if you haven't caught up to Mushoku Tensei Season 2 Part 2, here's your spoiler warning. Skip to the timestamp below to be safe from spoilers. We good? Okay.
Hero bro, let's go!
So this was something I was spoiled on. Since I was watching the dub, it was almost impossible not to stumble across a post featuring Paul's death and Roxy's way of dragging Rudeus out of his depression. But before we get into that, let's focus on Paul's death for a second. Because once again, we see Rudeus' hubris cost him something dearly. While fighting a Hydra, an enormous monster that was thought to be a myth in this world, Rudeus comes up with a plan inspired by Hercules to kill the beast. And his plan works. It works really well. They only have one head left to go, and Rudeus freezes. Not out of fear or because he's been hurt, but because of his confidence. Having dealt with the other dozen heads so easily, he takes a moment to bask in the glory. That his plan was about to slay the beast and free his mother, and because of this amateur mistake, his foresight fails him, and it's left to his father to cover his blind spot. In a state of adrenaline, Rudeus plunges his hand into the Hydra's eye, costing him the limb, but that's not the only thing that the fight took from him. When the dust settles, Rudeus finds his dad. Or at least what's left of him. When his father pushed him out of the way, he traded his life for his son's. With Rudeus too busy celebrating his premature victory, Paul did what any parent would do in that situation, and sacrificed himself for his son's future. Not only has Rudeus lost his father and his hand, but his mom, the person that they all fought so valiantly to save, has been mentally reduced to a baby due to the state of her imprisonment. It would be enough to break anyone. And we know how easy it is to break Rudeus. In his second life alone, he's been through more than most can ever imagine, has gone through more turmoil than any child should have to go through, and has been left to ask himself if he really is worthy to continue living, or if this was all some kind of horrible mistake. So when Roxy, this young woman who's also trying to make sense of a world that she had been ostracized from, sees her former apprentice begin to slip down the spirals of depression, she does the only thing she can think of, and she gives him her body. She acts selfishly to take advantage of the situation. Switch the roles around and the show would have been cancelled on the spot. Roxy suffers no repercussions for her actions, but is instead rewarded as Rudeus finds out he's more like his dad than he thought. Due to her actions, he finds that he loves both Roxy and his pregnant wife who's waiting for him back home equally. With Roxy's support, Rudeus is able to pick himself back up and prevent himself from spiraling once again. Elise, one of Rudeus' comrades who knows Sylphie and how much Rudeus loves her, notices what Roxy has done, but instead of scolding either of them, she flips the script on its head and actually ends up encouraging the affair, but only after she respectfully asks if he's a follower of a certain religion that looks down on and bans polygamy. And this is where the main controversy of the season begins. And I can't blame the fandom on this. But then I also have to keep in mind my own experiences. I grew up in a Catholic household with two loving parents that would never dream of considering another partner, both due to their faith and how they grew up. And I have to believe most of you watching are also in a similar boat, seeing as only 2% of the world practices polygamy, and that's being gracious. Maybe it's not religion, it can be your parents, your role models, the media around you, government enforcement, or society's expectations of you. But Mushoku Tensei isn't a part of our world. It's a fantasy, and that gives it an opportunity to try something new. When it comes to harem anime, more often than not, they tend to end with only one character getting chosen to be in a relationship. This leads to some online forums asking for an all route, and whether this is a joke or not, you have to admit, this is a type of story we rarely get to see. So with Mushoku Tensei taking a stab at the polygamous route, I'm left curious more than anything else, especially as a storyteller. That doesn't mean Mushoku Tensei handled it perfectly. Roxy's confession? No. Let's call it out as it really is. She had feelings for Rudeus. She saw him down in the dumps, and she took her shot. She took advantage of the situation for her own personal gain. She admits to it herself, but that doesn't make it any better. If anything, it makes it worse, because she was fully conscious of what she was doing. When it comes to stuff like this, Mushoku Tensei is fairly light with consequences. Rudeus is a peeping Tom for a majority of Season 1, and he usually gets his due with a thwack to the head. There are several scenes sprinkled in the show like this, where I could either do without, or would be able to deliver the same impact with a quick rewrite. And it seems like those that make me so apprehensive to talk about this show. I would have preferred if Roxy's sex scene had been cut altogether, and we just got to see Roxy be there for Rudeus in his time of need. If I remember correctly, this would be the first time, or at least one of the rare few times, someone with a notable connection to Rudeus would be able to comfort him so soon after such a personal tragedy. The same results could have been achieved without any boundaries being crossed. It could have been a slow scene where Rudeus realizes his feelings for Roxy, not because she wanted to have sex with him, but because she was such a willing shoulder to cry on, because she supported him, and because she helped him get back on his feet. And when it comes to this last point I'm about to bring up, I don't even know if I want it handled differently or not. I just don't know how I feel. Sylphie is Rudeus' wife. Their childhood best friends reunited after years of being apart, and she's pregnant with his kid. And she accepts Roxy as Rudeus' second wife, almost immediately. I mean, she lets Norn chew him out for a good minute without stepping in or stopping her. But when Norn finishes her religious spiel, Sylphie stops Roxy from leaving and tells her that she was expecting Rudeus to bring home a second woman since...
I mean, he's kind of a horn dog, but he does have a big heart, so I knew our little family would be expanding eventually.
It's been a while, so I can't quite remember if Sylphie and Roxy met back when she was training Rudeus as a child. But from Sylphie's perspective, this random woman just came into her husband's life and he's asking to marry her after spending a few months together. Either way, it looks really, really bad on Rudeus' part. At the very least, he wasn't trying to hide the affair and he was honest with his feelings from the start. But that doesn't make it any better. Simply by changing the sex scene into a more supportive scene, a lot of things could have been worked around, but this is what we ended up with. I don't know, Sylphie's reaction seems like a very easy solution to the situation. But then again, I'm also very interested to see how the show is going to handle this growing family unit.
Then, episode 11 happened. I got told by some people in the fan base that this one's gonna be a filter. This one is going to be a filter.
Now, would I say that the series has thrown me off? No, I'm still here to stay. The bar is really low, and I feel like the series is gonna have to do something extra atrocious to take me out, and I'm really hoping it doesn't get to that point. This series has had some of the most unique storytelling and decision-making I've seen in Isekai, and it really makes me appreciate it for what it is. With Season 3's production being confirmed, I cannot wait to see how the Grey Rat family dynamics will grow and evolve as the characters get more intermingled with each other's lives, and how Rudeus' past trauma and experiences will shape the story moving forward. If you made it this far into the video, you've either skipped here from the timestamp, you've already seen the series, or you really don't care about spoilers. If you're part of the latter group and what I've said hasn't turned you off, I highly recommend you give Mushoku Tensei a chance. I primarily stuck to Season 2 for spoilers, so there's a lot of fun and surprises to be held in Season 1 for you. Also remember to like the video and subscribe. This is still a relatively small channel, so every like, comment, and share counts when it comes to getting noticed by the algorithm. This video was also an excerpt from my Spring 2024 anime retrospective video, so go on over there if you'd like to hear my personal favorite anime from each genre of the season. It should hopefully be up in a couple weeks after this video drops. Check out the Amazon affiliate links in the description and pinned comment. I've got the light novel, manga, and Blu-rays from Mushoku Tensei linked below. Any purchase you make through those links helps support the channel at no extra cost to you. As for me, I want to start reading the translated novels and see what's been cut out of the show. I'm a slow reader, so I doubt I'll catch up by the time the new season comes out, but at least I'll be refreshed on the earlier parts of the series that I'm a bit foggy on. But before Mushoku Tensei Season 3 releases, another one of my favorite isekai is just up on the horizon. And trust me when I say, I cannot wait to talk about that.